Welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication here at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. With us again is Chris Sims. This is part two, so if you were just watching Comic Culture and you were saying, I thought I just saw Chris Sims, you're not seeing double. This is Chris Sims back with us. Chris, welcome back.
Always a pleasure to be here.
I think one more, you get the free luggage.
Oh boy, that's exciting.
So when we were last speaking, we were talking about the great Jack Kirby, and we were talking about how his writing style was as, I guess, bombastic as his art style.
That's the word for it. Bombastic is the word for it, yeah.
And I think you left off with a next issue blurb, and that was one of the things that Kirby would always be able to sell that next issue of what was going to come up. And if you just want to continue with your thoughts.
Well, they're amazing to read because, you know, he's from a time when comics are still largely episodic. When he kind of takes over and starts doing his own stuff, it's 1971. So, you know, I consider his first issue of Jimmy Olsen to be the end of the Silver Age, especially for DC, because comics just don't go back to the way they were anymore. They're still very episodic. You know, you're still picking up an issue and maybe you don't get the next one. You know, there's no pull list. There's subscription services, but there aren't a lot of people that have them. So Kirby's doing ongoing stories, though. So Kirby's doing, you know, the same thing that he had done with Stan Lee and Fantastic Four since Galactus showed up in 1965. They're doing these continuing stories that kind of go and build on each other. And maybe they aren't back to the status quo at the end of that issue. So in order to kind of hook people and make sure that they were getting the next issue, he always puts those next issue blurbs, and they're always fantastic. I remember that there's one, and it's the one issue is just don't miss the biofanatic Arnim Zola. Who is he? What is he? It's like, well, I want to know who Arnim Zola is. I want to know what he is. He's a biofanatic, I guess. And then at the end of the next issue, they're making another weird monster, and it's only the Red Skull could conceive of it. Only Arnim Zola could build it. It's like, well, I just met this Arnim Zola guy, so I guess we're going to get something weirder now. So they're really compelling, and I love that idea that, you know, the nature of comics is that they sink their hooks into you in a way that you don't really get from other media. You kind of get it from, you know, soap operas and pro wrestling are the only other like really long form sequential narratives. Whereas comics weren't necessarily built for that, but they became that, and they did it on a scale that no one else has done. Like there's no other medium that has the massive shared universe of DC or Marvel or even smaller stuff like Paul Grist's work. Jack Staff feels like it's part of a massive shared universe. Danger Club feels like it's part of a massive shared universe. Because superhero comics have had that nature of building a shared universe for so long that they kind of speak that language in a way that no other media does, which is something I find very appealing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the one thing I do like about the comics is you do feel like you're actually getting something from the story that it's going to lead you, the next issue, they're not going to forget. And I know a lot of people decry the continuity, failures.
Oh, if you want to talk about continuity, how much time do we have? I will talk continuity all day long.
But you know, my point is that, you know, you have a character and you know that if Spider-Man defeats somebody in this issue, he's going to talk about it next issue. So you feel like you're part of that, that club, I guess.
One of the things that Chad and I have a friend, and he said that continuity, because you get writers and you get artists and editors talking about how continuity is a barrier. It's something that keeps people from getting into comics because they don't, you know, they have that long history of the universe that isn't necessarily accessible to people. It's more accessible now than it ever has been before because you have stuff like Marvel Unlimited, or you have stuff like digital comics, and even, you know, going to the store and picking up the big reprint books. You can find stuff out. It's very, very easy. But you get a lot of editors who are like, oh yeah, continuity, you know, there's parts of continuity that we just don't want to talk about, so continuity is bad. And what that means is that they don't want to talk about, I talked to Kelly Sue DeConnick, and the way she put it was, nobody who's reading Iron Fist wants to talk about the broccoli people. Because Iron Fist is a book about Kung Fu, and there's a story where you find out that the mystical city of Kunlun is beset by broccoli people, the Hill Three. And look, that's fine. If you don't want to talk about it, don't talk about it. But also, if Iron Fist meets a broccoli person, he should not be surprised because he has been through it before. And Chad and I were having a conversation. Chad Bowers, who's my co-writer on Subatomic Party Girls, Downset Fight.
I'll just hold these up.
We're doing a story in Bill and Ted. We have another project coming up soon that we can't talk about, unfortunately, but it's going to be really fun. Chad and I had a conversation after we were coming out of Captain America 2. We were coming out of The Winter Soldier. And Chad, we got back into Chad's car, and he was like, hey, man, continuity won. Because the biggest thing in the world right now are these Avengers movies where you have to see 9 of them. And it's true. Like, people like that about... They like there being a universe where, the Avengers and Captain America and Thor and Black Widow and the Hulk all exist and are all having their own adventures. Like, the most fun thing about the Avengers movie for me was that they did it. There are bits and pieces of that movie that I like. There are bits and pieces that I don't like. But the big thing is, like, yeah, they really did take Iron Man and Thor and Captain America from 3 other movies and put them into one, and it worked. And people loved it. Avengers made $1 billion. The Avengers franchise is continuing to make billions of dollars. There was a movie with the Guardians of the Galaxy in it last year that was huge. So I think continuity is something people really enjoy. It's why pro wrestling has fans. It's why soap operas have fans. Because all it means is that stuff makes sense. It's just a fancy word that means that these stories do not happen in a vacuum. And I think people respond to that. Maybe they don't respond to, this. Maybe they don't respond to this medium. But they certainly like it in movies. They certainly like it in TV shows. You've got Arrow and Flash on TV now, and those are shows that are building on continuity that tie into each other. There's going to be an animated series with them too. So I guess the short version of that is that I'm a big fan of continuity, the idea of continuity and things kind of existing in a shared universe.
And I started reading comics in the mid-'80s, and that was already when Marvel's continuity and DC's continuity was pretty well ingrained, and yet I was able to pick it up because I guess back then you had writers and artists who would give you that 2 or 3 panel summary of the last issue, and you kind of pick it up and go from there.
There's a lot of flashbacks and a lot of footnotes in those comics. And I can, as someone who has written comics, I can understand you don't have a lot of real estate in the page. You don't have a lot of real estate in a book. So having to go back and reference that stuff can be frustrating. It can also help you pad your paycheck. I just read a Robert Kanigher book where literally half the comic is an issue of Lois Lane, and half the comic is explaining what happened in the previous issue. So I'm sure that was an easy 15 minutes of writing for him. But yeah, there's it's something that I wish would happen more, and it's something that I think people have started to embrace again in comics, because it's always a pendulum. It's always Batman 66 is the most popular thing in the world. Oh no, wait, it's silly. Oh no, wait, it's garbage, and we want Batman to be serious. Oh, maybe it's not so bad. Okay, now it's back. It always swings.
Well, speaking of swinging, and I'm going to swing for the fences.
Okay, this should be interesting.
Okay. No, you mentioned Bill and Ted, which is one of those movie franchises from the late 80s, early 90s. Keanu Reeves, of course, and I forget the other gentleman.
Alex Winter. Nobody ever remembers Alex Winter.
I remember his TV show on MTV, but I basically, I saw that movie on a date, and I had a better time with my date than I did watching the movie. And I've tried to put the movie out of the back of my head as much as possible as a result. But Bill and Ted, you're working on a new Bill and Ted short. And
yeah, we did the Boom Studios got the Bill and Ted license, and they kind of announced that Bill and Ted was coming back as a comic. And if you've read any Boom Studio books, they do Adventure Time, regular show. Excuse me, regular show. They do a lot of books where they'll have the main team will do like a 16-page lead story, and then they'll have like a 6-page backup. So Ryan North, who's the writer on Squirrel Girl with Erica Henderson, he was the writer of the Adventure Time comic, Eisner winner, Harvey winner. He's in number 1, and we're the backup in number 2. And it was fun because, oddly enough, like the thing that I think Chad and I like most about Bill and Ted is the comics. A lot of movie fans might not know this, but there was a Marvel series that came out around the time of the sequel, the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, where Evan Dorkin, the incredible creator of Milk and Cheese, incredible cartoonist, he did an adaptation, like a 4-issue adaptation of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and it was successful enough that they just kept it going. So you get Evan Dorkin doing Bill and Ted stories for like 12 more issues. It's been out of print for years. Slave Labor actually brought it back into print. Slave Labor Graphics, the publisher, they brought it back into print a few years ago, and I read it, and it's Bill and Ted. It's recognizably Bill and Ted, but it's also very recognizably an Evan Dorkin comic, a weird, all-ages Evan Dorkin comic. So when we found out they were doing Bill and Ted comics, we were actually really excited because, there's a good movie and a weird movie and then some great comics. And so we were excited to be part of that. If you haven't watched Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey in a while, that's a weird movie. That is a really weird movie. I had kind of forgotten that they went to hell in that movie. But our story is kind of it takes place between the two movies and sort of plays off of a weird throwaway line in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey that Chad was watching it for research. And he called me up and he was like, hey, how does Einstein know what Smokey and the Bandit 3 is? And so our story is a 6-page explanation of how Einstein knows what Smokey and the Bandit 3 is. It's very, very weird. And we're doing it with Brooke Allen, who is the artist of Lumberjanes, which is one of my favorite books of the past year. Just an incredible, incredible comic. We're really excited to be working with her. And yeah, I'm hoping we get to do a little bit more for Boom.
Well, here's a question about Bill and Ted. Now, Keanu Reeves, Alex Winter are the actors in this film. Are you? Did they sacrifice or sign an agreement that said that their likenesses could be used in other mediums in perpetuity, or is this something where they've got to knock on Mr. Reeves' door and say, "Hey, we've got something for you to sign"? And he's, whoa.
Whoa. That I don't know. We're also going to be doing the John Wick comics, by the way. No, we're not. That's a lie. I told you I was going to lie.
That's okay. I believed you because I'm an idiot.
I honestly don't know. It's a weird thing where licensed comics are so weird because there's so many likeness rights. And I know that was a big thing with Batman 66, that not only kept it off of DVD for such a long time, but it kept it off of, kept them from doing comics about a lot of those characters for so long. Because, Warner Brothers, obviously, Warner Brothers DC Comics, they own Commissioner Gordon and Batman and Robin. But they don't necessarily own Adam West and Burt Ward and Neil Hamilton, Stafford Rep, Madge Blake. So if you read the Batman 66 comics that are coming out digitally right now, you can tell when they get the rights because people start to look more like they look. Like Commissioner Gordon looks like comic Commissioner Gordon. He doesn't look like Neil Hamilton in those comics, and there's a reason for that, I think. But that is not that is not something that Chad and I had to worry about when we made our script. We were just like, hey, can we use these characters? And they said yes. So I don't know if that is an artist's question. Like, hey, draw them less like Keanu. But yeah, I have no idea. I know that Bill and Ted are in it.
Well, I'm imagining we're going to have a few moments of Bo Bandit Burton.
Talking about Bandit Darvel?
Darvel, I'm sorry. Gosh darn it. Yes, I'm imagining we're going to have some of that. But if it's Smokey and the Bandit 3, we've got Jerry Reed as the bandit. So.
Originally, it was the original title, which is actually in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, is Smokey is the Bandit, which is because the movie was originally pitched as just Jackie Gleason playing both parts, having some kind of mental break and thinking he was the bandit and chasing himself. And that tested very poorly. That's a little bit of Smokey and the Bandit trivia for everybody out there.
I'm just upset that I didn't get.
It's just on TV in the background. You never actually see the bandit in there. Well, you do see Einstein.
He makes a mean bagel. Let's get back to
him and his brother.
Yes, Batman 66, mm-hmm. And I picked up one recently with art by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, where we see. I believe it was Two-Face. It was the unfinished or the
the Harlan Ellison script, which Harlan Ellison had no concept of TV budgets. If you read that, there's a riverboat, there's a helicopter chase, all kinds of stuff.
And it seems like he was one of those writers. He's credited for writing City on the Edge of Forever from Star Trek. And that was one of those scripts that, again, they had to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite to get to the point where they could actually have something that they could film on a budget. So we have this Batman that comes out, and we're able to finally get these characters that, millions of people to this day still think, Bao, Pam when they think of comics. And now we have a comic that comes out with that. And I just was wondering, your thoughts on this as part of the mythos and as just in general comics.
I love the show. I love the comics. Obviously I'm a big Batman fan. I have billed myself as the world's foremost Batmanologist. I've been on CNN as a Batman expert. I've been on The Daily Show as a Batman expert. I've been on the Huffington Post as a Batman expert. I read a lot of Batman comics. And I feel like people had a misconception about the 66 era for a long time, that it was determining what happened in the comics, that it was, the campy stuff wasn't part of the comics to begin with. I will say, Lorenzo Simple Jr., who was responsible for writing a lot of those episodes and also wrote the Flash Gordon movie that I'm a big fan of, he thought it was hilarious that people took Batman seriously. He would have hated me. he would have hated me because I've spent so much time talking about Batman. He just thought like the comedy of the show came from taking it seriously. But at the same time, I've recently been writing the episode guide, and the first 4 adventures, the first 8 episodes of the show, are lifted directly from the comics. The only thing that they've done is pad them out a little to make an hour of television out of a 8-page story. Comics, the Batman comics of the Silver Age are extremely representative of what happened on the show. And I think people miss that because it's like 1971, not long after the show ends, that the people in the comics are like, okay, we need to, they close up the Batcave. They move Batman into the city in the 70s to kind of get distance from the show. And so I think there's been, in the way that there's a reluctance to kind of embrace Silver Age stuff in all of comics, that it's seen as silly, that it's seen as childish, because it was, primarily written for children. The Batman TV show was kind of for so long like a flashpoint, an object of hatred, because everybody thought, oh, that's the only thing superheroes can be. And then the 80s came around, and so many people thought, oh, Watchmen is the only thing superheroes can be. And the truth is, it can be everything. Superheroes are a very broad genre. You can have, serious superheroes, you can have silly superheroes. And for so long, it's been, the pendulum very rarely swings back in the middle, where I think it should be. I think it's weird that, there's no Wonder Woman comic for kids. There's not really a Superman comic for kids right now. There's not really a Batman comic for kids right now because there's no TV tie-in book for Batman right now. And that's not to say that like I don't enjoy mainstream Batman comics. Like Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo are doing one of my favorite Batman runs of all time. Morrison's run is very clearly not for children, but it's one of my favorite Batman runs of all time. It's just a weird thing that people saw the TV show and thought that it was not exactly representative of comics from the late 60s, which it was. Mm-hmm. It's just that the pendulum swung so far back starting in 71 that, and that it stuck around, that 40 years later there were still, Biff Pow, comics aren't just for kids, right. Articles. And the problem with that is that by the time those articles were coming out 40 years later, there weren't comics for kids. Comics aren't just for kids was no longer the news item. Like it was a news item when Scholastic picked up Bone, and it sold so many copies as a young reader's book. The news was when the manga boom happened in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was, servicing a market that superheroes had kind of actively tried to move away from. Kids, women. And unfortunately, that was a prevailing thing for such a long time. And now I think we're in a really good place where things are moving back to finding a little equilibrium, where one of DC's best-selling comics is Harley Quinn, that has a woman in the lead role. That Marvel's doing stuff like Squirrel Girl and the Spider-Woman series, and they just announced a big Avengers book that's going to be an all-female team. That DC's doing Batgirl and Gotham Academy. Gotham Academy is not a book that I think would have come out in the early 90s or the 80s just because they didn't care about representing that market. But now we're in a place where that book can come out and it can be great and it can go after readers that, maybe don't want to read Snyder and Capullo's book. Or readers like me who want to read it all, who want to read it all and think it's great.
Well, it's funny. I speak a lot with the writers at Action Lab, and they do a great number of their books are all ages books.
Yeah, I mean the first big Action Lab book was Princeless, which is a really, really good book.
And it seems to me that the companies like Marvel and DC, not so much Marvel but more DC, have sort of alienated that younger reader, and have tried to get a little bit more, I guess, serious the later age reader, I guess people my age. And it's like you're saying, that pendulum is
Because
swinging
you and
back.
I have disposable income.
That's true, yes.
Because you will buy a Firestorm shirt.
Yes,
And,
I will.
And I will buy a 90s Superboy action figure when I can. But, our letterer on Downset Fight and Subatomic Party Girls is Josh Kroc. And he has a 7-year-old daughter, 7 or 8-year-old daughter. And so working with him, and he's very frustrated because, she loves Wonder Woman. Because as a kid, you go to the store, you see Wonder Woman on stuff. You see Wonder Woman on TV. Maybe you catch a rerun of the Wonder Woman show. And then you go to the comic book store, and what is there? There's good Wonder Woman comics, but they're generally not for 7-year-olds, unfortunately. She can watch Justice League Unlimited on TV all day and love what she sees there, but what's she going to get in comics? So with Party Girls, particularly, we wanted to have an adventure that, is funny to us. Like, it's hilarious to us that we made so many Bob Seger jokes in that stupid book. But we also wanted to have, a bright space adventure that, Josh could give to his daughter, that, kids could read, that we could go to cons and say, hey, you can get this comic. It's $1 online. It's not expensive, and hopefully you'll get some fun out of it.
And I think Bob Seger, he's on tour right now, and I think that's due in no small part to you.
Oh, now that one I will take credit for. I'm sure we brought back Bob Seger.
Somebody had to.
Silver Bullet Band.
That's right. I did want to talk about a couple of comics, and I think some concepts that would have worked had they been coming out now.
Sure.
One of the books that I remember reading, I guess about 20 years ago, was Major Bummer.
Major Bummer was really ahead of its time. I haven't read the whole series, but what I've seen of it, what I've read of it is, if that book would have been 3 or 4 years later, I think it would have been a hit.
I mean, the idea behind it is that you have a slacker who, through no fault of his own, he's mistaken for somebody who's a real go-getter, and he's given superpowers because they were trying to give it to this super genius guy at a prestigious school, and these aliens give him superpowers, and he's just a real lazy guy.
Right.
And all this weird stuff starts happening to him. And so that's one of those books that and I think at the same time they came out with Young Heroes in Love.
Young Heroes in Love was one that I have not read, but I've got a lot of friends who are fans of. Erica was a big fan of Young Heroes in Love.
It's a very similar style. It's not that photorealistic style that DC was going for at the time. And it was one of those books that was just different, and it just didn't seem to find its voice back then.
Yeah, I mean, to their credit, DC in the mid to late 90s was really experimental with a lot of stuff. And I always love going back and reading those books because they're so weird. They publish stuff like Major Bummer. They publish stuff like Young Heroes in Love, or even Aztec, which is a straight superhero comic, but it's not, it's not a Superman or Batman book. And so it was a Grant Morrison, Mark Miller, Steve Ewell comic that nobody read. Because it's 2 years before everyone was reading Mark Miller books, 2 years before everybody was reading Grant Morrison books. And it's really smart and has a lot of commentary in it. And 2-3 years later, that book would have been a smash. But that's the way comics have always been. One of the fun things to do is go through back issues, and you can see stuff that's ahead of its time, and you feel bad for it because it's never stuff that was successful. The successful books are always very much of their time. Batman Year One could not have come out any other time than 1986, 1987. It's such a mid-'80s New York book. But if you go to 1966 and you read Metamorpho, Metamorpho is very much a Silver Age comic, but it's also doing parodies of stuff. There is a 3-issue parody of the Galactus trilogy that came out the year after Lee and Kirby. And there's nowhere else in Silver Age DC where people are acknowledging the existence of, or let alone doing parodies of Marvel books. And the whole trick with it is that instead of Galactus, there's I forget his name, but he's 2 feet tall. He's 2 feet tall and looks like a Christmas elf, except for his hat, there's an eye at the top of his hat. The Thunderer, I think is his name. And he gets beaten by a guitar that shoots laser beams. And that comic reads like it came out 15 years after it did. Because it's so funny and sharp. And, obviously, Bob Haney and Ramona Fradon, they knew, oh, yeah, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee are kind of the big thing right now. We need to respond to that. But it wasn't what the DC readers wanted at the time, Young Heroes in Love wasn't what the DC readers wanted at the time, unfortunately.
Well, I see we have about 3 minutes left. Which
Oh, okay. It's flying by.
It is flying by. I just wanted to get your thoughts, speaking of books that sort of reference other, in this case it's a TV show, that reference other work. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Venture Brothers.
I love the Venture Brothers. Love it. Love it.
Speaking of continuity like we were earlier, it's one of those things that there's so much that you have to know about the characters that in every episode.
It's one of those books that, or one of those shows that builds on itself really well, but it also trades in that same language. It trades in the language of superhero comics and adventure shows, obviously, especially. And it's one of those things that, you see it and it's like, oh, it's a parody of Johnny Quest. But it goes so much deeper than that and builds its own universe that's really compelling. But then you get stuff like, I've always said that on the list of things we don't really need to see again in comics is Batman and Robin gay jokes. Because it's been done. Because everybody knows, everybody knows the jokes by heart. To not only do it, but to get Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman on Batman the Animated Series, and go so far with it, that episode was amazing. That episode was beautiful. And it builds on everything we know about the Venture Brothers. It builds on Hank loving Batman as much as he does, which is a kind of running thing in the show. It builds on that, but it also builds on the larger society.
I hate to interrupt, but we are being told that it's time to wrap up. I want to thank Chris Sims for coming onto Comic Culture again. I'd like to thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again next time for another exciting episode.